remember that winter like it never left my bones. The wind still bites the same, even after all these years, like a promise it meant to keep. Folks around here talk about the blizzard of '84 like it was some kind of legend, but I remember it for what it really was. Cold, mean, and hungry. It took things from people. Sometimes it took people from things. I had a cabin up on the ridge north of Willow Creek. Nothing much to look at. Just 4 walls and a roof that moaned when the wind blew hard. I kept mostly to myself back then. Had a horse, a dog, and enough whiskey to stay quiet. That was all I wanted. Quiet. Until that night. The storm rolled in early. Gray clouds like bruises across the sky. Snow came fast, sideways, thick enough to erase the world if you blinked. I just finished nailing a shutter that had come loose when I saw a figure down by the creek bed. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light. Nobody sane traveled in weather like that. Then I saw another shape, smaller, clinging to the first. 3 of them, maybe 4. I grabbed my coat, stepped into the wind, and for a second, I almost turned back. There's a part of a man that learns not to invite ghosts in. But something in me couldn't leave them out there. They were half a mile away. Maybe less. Stumbling through the snow like shadows with weight. When I got close enough, I saw it was a woman. Her dress stiff with frost. Face pale. Lips cracked and bleeding. She had 3 boys with her. One no more than 5. Another maybe 8. The oldest tall enough to look me straight in the chest, trying his best to look brave. The woman turned when she heard me coming. Her eyes caught what little light the world had left, and I swear to God, they looked like storm glass, gray and deep, like she'd seen worse than this blizzard could ever offer. "You can't stay out here," I shouted over the wind. "There's shelter up the ridge." She didn't answer, just looked at me like she was trying to measure what kind of man I was. Folks in these parts learn to read danger fast. I dropped my scarf, took a step back, hands raised so she'd see I meant no harm. "You'll freeze if you don't come," I said. The oldest boy shifted forward, half ready to fight, half ready to fall apart. "Ma," he said, his voice small but certain, "please." That was the moment she decided. She nodded just once, and I led them toward the ridge. Snow filled our tracks before we could see where we come from. The horse snorted behind me, nervous but steady. By the time we reached the cabin, her youngest was asleep in her arms, his head buried in her coat. I pushed open the door, the hinges screaming against the cold, and waved them inside. The warmth hit them slow, like it didn't trust them yet. She stood just inside the doorway, staring at the fire. Her hands were shaking, but she didn't move to warm them. "You can sit," I told her. "Ain't much, but it's dry." She glanced around. Sparse furniture, 1 bed, 1 chair, a table half built from scrap wood. I dragged a blanket off my cot, tossed it her way. She caught it, without thanks, without hesitation. Wrapped the boys in it before she took any for herself. That's when I knew she wasn't passing through. You can tell by the way a person saves warmth for others. It's the kind of thing you don't unlearn. The fire cracked, and for a while, neither of us spoke. The storm outside screamed like a thing alive. Every now and then, one of the boys would whimper in his sleep, and she'd hush him with a soft hum that almost drowned in the wind. I poured coffee into 2 tin cups and set one near her boot. She didn't touch it. "What's your name?" I asked him. "Sarah," she said after a long time. "Sarah Calhoun." "Cole Tucker," I said, "on cabin's mine. You're safe here." She nodded, but her eyes kept darting to the window, like she expected someone to come pounding on the door. I didn't ask why. You don't pry when a person's holding themselves together with silence. When morning came, the world was white and cruel. The roof groaned under the weight of snow. My horse had iced over his mane. The boys were awake, hungry, eyes wide like pups that hadn't decided whether to trust me yet. Sarah thanked me in a voice so quiet it barely existed. She tried to stand, stumbled, and caught herself on the table. "You best sit," I told her. "You're still half frozen." She bristled, pride flashing through the frost. "I can work," she said. "I'll cook clean, whatever's needed." I shook my head. "It ain't about work. Just stay warm. That's payment enough." But she did work. The kind of steady, careful labor that keeps a man's home from feeling empty. She boiled water, scrubbed pans, mended the torn curtain I'd been ignoring for months. The boys helped stack wood, fetched water from the barrel. For the first time in a long while, the cabin felt alive, and that scared me. A man like me, I'd buried enough ghosts to know life don't stay. It always asks for something back. That night, after they'd eaten, I stepped out to check the traps. The air was still, the kind of still that feels like it's waiting. From the ridge, I could see the faint glow of the town down below. Willow Creek. I hadn't been there in months, maybe years. Folks had long memories there, and none of them kind. I watched that light for a while, and I swear it flickered like a warning. I turned back toward the cabin, the smoke rising soft into the black sky, and something in me settled. Maybe it was foolish, but I remember thinking, if the world ever meant to give a man a second chance, it'd come looking just like her. Tired, fierce, and standing in the snow with nowhere else to go. By the second morning, the worst teeth of the storm had ground themselves down, but the cold stayed mean. The chimney breathed straight and tall into a sky the color of a knife. I rolled from the cot before daylight, careful not to wake the boys. Sarah had curled herself on the floor beside them, one arm thrown over the youngest like a gate. I laid another log on the fire and stood a while, palms near the heat, letting the ache leave my knuckles. Somewhere under the drifted cottonwoods, a fox barked, sharp and lonely. It sounded like the country itself, talking to whoever would listen. I made biscuits from the last of the lard and flour, boiled coffee black enough to scold a mule. When the smell found them, the boys rose one by one with the same look every starved creature gets, a mix of shame and relief. Sarah sat up slow, hair loose and dark, and for a second she forgot to guard her face. I saw the girl she must have been, quick and pretty and unafraid. Then the years dropped back over her like a shawl. "Eat," I said. "There's more wood to split before noon, and the day don't wait for us." The oldest, the one with the narrow jaw and the stare that tried to tell me he was a man, nodded and reached for a tin plate. He kept his body between me and the others without thinking. A habit learned, too young. The middle boy tried to say grace with his mouth full, and earned a soft rebuke from Sarah, the kind that warms a room more than any fire. The little one set his biscuit down twice to smile at the dog, then finally remembered to chew. Nothing on this earth has the pure focus of a 5-year-old with a hot meal. I took my coffee to the doorway and looked out across the yard. The drifts lay like sheeted bodies over the grass. The barn door creaked on a rope hinge. My horse stamped and tossed his head at me as if to say we'd been fools to invite trouble and colder fools to keep it. I set the cup aside, stepped into my boots, and started for the woodpile. The oldest boy followed without being asked. He took up a smaller axe, tested the weight, and squared his feet the way a man had taught him once. The swing was wrong, but the will was right. "Name's Jacob," he said after 3 chops. "Ben is 8. Tommy is 5. Ma can cook better than this when there's things to cook." He said it not to wound, but to promise that I hadn't seen their best day. "I believe it," I told him. "These biscuits are only good because you're hungry." He looked sideways, trying not to smile. His hair fell across his eyes, and he swiped at it with the back of his wrist. The axe bit deep and stuck. He put his weight on the handle and breathed through his nose until the wood gave up. Boys like that break your heart slow. They carry a man's worry in a frame too small to hold it. By noon we had a neat stack under canvas, enough to laugh at the wind if it tried again. Back inside, Sarah had cleaned the table to bare wood and set the room in order the way storms arrange rivers. Nothing fancy, everything where it belongs. She'd found a needle and mended the torn sleeve on my only decent shirt. It lay folded on the chair like something holy. "You didn't have to," I said. "I know," she answered, "but it needed doing." She wouldn't meet my eyes when she spoke. The ring on her finger was silver gone dull. She turned it once without seeing she'd done it. A habit. I went to the corner where I kept a roll of sailcloth and a jar of tacks. I measured the space from the cot to the far wall, and with a few steady blows of the hammer, hung a curtain from beam to beam. It fell heavy and straight, making a thin room out of nothing. The sound of those tacks going in was clean and certain. Sometimes a man has to pound a thing into place just to prove the world still takes nails. "You have the bed," I said. "I'll take the barn." She looked up hard. "We can't put you out of your own house." "You won't," I said. "I don't sleep much in here anyhow." That was true and not. The barn had been my refuge since the night the world went black. The house kept a kind of echo in it, no matter how loud the fire cracked. I ran my hand over the curtain's edge and pretended the decision was practical. She started to protest again, then let it go. Some gifts are easier taken when you don't argue their size. Toward afternoon, the sky brightened the way winter does when it means to trick you. I hitched the sled, and the boys begged to ride, so I set them in the back and led the horse toward the creek, then up the old trail that drifted past a knoll dotted with sage and stone. I didn't plan to go that way. My feet did it while my head looked elsewhere. By the time I noticed, the markers were already standing before us, 2 wooden crosses I'd shaped with my own hands, weathered down to a gray that matched the clouds. I stopped. The boys went still at once, sensing a boundary even a child knows to respect. Sarah stepped down, lips parting like she might ask, then closing again. Names had been carved with a nail on each crossbar. I never could bring myself to hire a proper marker. The money was there. The will wasn't. Eleanor, Daniel. I knelt because a man should, though the ice bit through my trousers and the pain felt earned. That small hill keeps the wind in its pocket and lets it go all at once. It took my breath the way grief does, not by force but by habit. I laid my palm against the wood and told them, as I always did when I came, that I was still here. Then I stood, put a hand to the brim of my hat, and we moved on without a word. There are some rooms in a man's house You don't invite strangers in, too. Not even when you've already given them your bed. We reached town the next day. Once the road opened its eyes, I needed flour, salt, coffee, and a reason to be seen with them so it wouldn't look like a secret. Secrets in a place like Willow Creek grow hooks. I hitched the sled outside Hartley's Mercantile and helped the boys down. People watch the way people do when they smell a story. Not hateful, not kind. A dog barked and got kicked quiet. The bell over the Mercantile door rang once and kept ringing in my head. Inside smelled of kerosene and molasses and the wet wool of men who overstay a stove. Hartley himself counted nails like they were coin. He nodded at me and then at the woman with the 3 shadows. "Storm got you doing charity work, Tucker," he said. "Got me buying," I answered, "same as any day." Sarah kept her eyes low, gathering what she could without touching anything too long. She moved like a person afraid to leave a mark. The oldest boy counted sacks with a soldier's attention. Ben pressed his nose to a jar of peppermint sticks and pretended the jar was smelling him back. Tommy held my coat tail, and every time I took a step, he took half a step more, like he aimed to catch my stride in smaller legs. We paid and packed the sled. That should have been the end of it, but towns are never done with you at the door. Reverend Mills came out from the post office with his collar like a white flag tucked under his chin. He had kind eyes that had learned to be stern by long practice. His look moved from me to Sarah to the curtain of sky beyond and back again, as if the weather might offer guidance. "Cole," he said, "are you keeping company these days?" "I'm keeping folks alive, Fry," I said. "A noble thing," he answered, "provided it's done with proper consideration." He meant walls and paper and the thin membrane between decency and sin that men like him are hired to police. I didn't argue. Men in black coats own more judgment than air. "They'll be safe, I said. He studied Sarah then, softening and hardening like a man at a window the light can't make up its mind about. He cleared his throat. "There's talk already," he said. "We can't stop talk, but we can keep it from turning ugly. Best come to the church on Sunday. Best let people see your intentions laid plain." He touched the brim of his hat to Sarah, as if her grief had rank, and then walked on. The boys watched him go with the respectful hatred children keep for men who might take a mother's attention. I stood there with my mouth full of answers I hadn't thought of yet. The wind threw grit down the street and rattled the sign of the livery. On the way out of town, a man I knew only by his waistcoat and his smile tipped that smile at us like it was a hat. Caleb Calhoun. He dealt in cattle, land, and the softer things a man with money can buy. His eyes were the color of green glass, pretty and mean. "Afternoon, Tucker," he said. "You found yourself a project." "Found folks in a storm," I said. "Storms pass," he answered, "and strays linger." He looked at Sarah long enough for disrespect, then moved along trailing cologne that didn't fit the weather. The boys pressed closer, and I felt the old heat rise in my chest, the kind that makes a man stupid. I swallowed it, because I had 4 lives with me, and one of them was mine. We rode out of town, under the cracked bell of that sky, quiet, in the way a wagon gets quiet when the driver means to listen for trouble. Back at the cabin, I set the flour tin high and the coffee higher and put my hand on the sailcloth curtain like a promise. I told the boys to whittle kindling, and if they drew blood to do it outside. I told the dog he was promoted to watchman, second only to me. I told myself I'd go to church on Sunday and say the bare minimum a man can say without being called a liar. Then night came down with its old habit, and the house breathed like it hadn't forgot how. Sarah stood by the fire, eyes on the flames as if reading them for scripture, and I heard my own voice in my head, a voice from a man I barely knew anymore, whispering what I hadn't meant to speak the first night. You're home now. It wasn't true yet, but I could feel the truth of it walking toward us, slow and patient as a thaw. Sunday came dressed in sunlight that didn't mean it. The snow had crusted over hard enough to walk on, and every step cracked like glass. I put on the shirt Sarah mended, brushed the frost from my hat, and tried to make myself look like a man who belonged among people. The boys were already fussing over the wagon, trying to scrub it clean of mud that never wanted to leave. Sarah stood in the doorway, pale in the light, her hair pinned tight. I hadn't seen her in anything but gray and brown since the storm. That morning, she wore a blue shawl that caught the sky just right. The color reminded me of what living looked like before you learned better. We rode down the ridge slow. The air cut clean and sharp, and the town bell carried across the valley like it was calling the dead more than the living. Willow Creek always looked smaller when you had distance on it, but the closer you got, the tighter it wound itself. Folks were stepping from houses, coats buttoned, hats straight, faces drawn up for judgment or forgiveness, depending on which they needed that day. I've been both kinds of man, but mostly the first. The church sat on a rise of stone, whitewashed once, now gray, where the weather had its way. We hitched the horse and walked up the path. I felt the eyes before I saw them. 100 conversations pretended to pause, but didn't. Sarah's back straightened. Jacob took her hand like he meant to guard her from the whole congregation. The Reverend stood at the door with that fixed smile that preachers use to make sin feel invited. "Good morning, Mr. Tucker," he said. "Mrs. Calhoun. Children." I tipped my hat. "Morning, Reverend. We come for the sermon." "I'm glad to see it," he said. "A man finds his strength in community." He stepped aside. The pews creaked under the weight of people sitting straighter than truth. The air inside smelled of pine oil and starch. I took a bench near the back, left space between me and the next family. Sarah sat with the boys. I watched her fingers twist that dull silver ring. The Reverend read his verses about mercy and clean hearts, and when he spoke of charity, his voice aimed our way. I could feel every word drop like a pebble in a tin bucket. The boys fidgeted, but stayed quiet. When the hymn started, Sarah didn't sing. She just closed her eyes and breathed like she was somewhere else entirely. After the service, people drifted out, slow, pretending not to stare. A few women offered Sarah a nod, the kind that says, "We'll pray for you, but not with you." Hartley, the storekeeper, tipped his hat halfway, then thought better of it. Calhoun waited by the gate, gloved hands resting on his cane, though I'd never known him lame. "Fine sermon," he said as we passed. "Could have been finer," I answered. His grin didn't falter. "You and the widow settling in then?" "Trying to," I said. "Winter's long." "It'll get longer," he said, and his eyes slid toward Sarah before moving on. He touched the brim of his hat to her, the way a man tips his hand before playing a bad card. I watched him walk off, slow and certain, and felt something cold shift inside me that had nothing to do with the weather. We didn't speak much on the ride home. The boys argued soft about whether the church bell or thunder was louder. Sarah looked out over the fields, lost somewhere I couldn't reach. When we reached the cabin, I went to the barn to think. I ran my hand along the rail, felt the splinters, the rough cut of work that made sense. Out there, the world didn't talk back. It just waited for you to decide. That night, I found a letter nailed to my door. No name, no seal, just one sheet of paper, edges curled from damp. I read it by lamplight. The words were neat, practiced. For the good of all concerned, it would be best if the widow and her children sought shelter elsewhere. Morality is fragile, and rumors travel fast. You are being watched. No signature, but the ink smelled of church ink, heavy with righteousness. I folded it once, twice, slid it into the stove, and watched it burn. Sarah saw the light flare and asked what it was. I said it was nothing worth keeping. She studied my face a moment longer than comfort allowed, then nodded and turned back to the table. The boys were carving little horses from scrap wood, tongues stuck out in concentration. The youngest held his piece up and asked if it could run. "Only if you believe hard enough," I told him. He smiled, proud of something that didn't need to move to matter. Days passed. The snow thawed, then froze again. We fell into rhythm. Chores, meals, quiet. She mended. I cut wood. The boys learned how to live where silence was thick but kind. Every now and then, I caught Sarah watching me, like she was trying to remember the shape of safety. Sometimes I caught myself looking back, wondering what it would be like to start again, to believe the past could freeze solid and stay buried under all that white. But ghosts don't keep still. One evening, near dusk, the sound of hooves came up the trail. I stepped outside before the dog could bark. Calhoun rode up with two men from the town council, both wearing the kind of smiles you save for funerals. He dismounted slow, brushed imaginary snow from his coat, and looked around the yard like it already belonged to him. "Evening, Tucker," he said. "Fine little homestead you got here. Shame if it got the wrong reputation." I stood easy, one hand resting on the post. "You come to bless it or buy it?" He chuckled. "Neither. Just thought you ought to know there's talk in town. Some folks think it improper, a man living with a widow and her brood under one roof. You can imagine how that might sound." "I can," I said. "Sounds like a man doing what's right." "Right and proper ain't always the same," he said. "Reverend's worried. Says he might have to bring it before the council." One of the men behind him coughed, trying to seem official. "It's for appearances, Tucker. We don't want trouble." "You mean you don't want tongues wagging?" I said. "That's your trouble, not mine." Calhoun's eyes hardened. "Careful, friend. Pride's a costly habit. The church can make things difficult." "Let it try," I said. For a moment no one moved. Then Sarah stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. Her face was calm, but her eyes burned. "You men have said your piece," she said. "Now leave." Calhoun smiled that slow smile again. "Ma'am, we mean no offense." "You already gave it," she said. He tipped his hat, mounted, and turned his horse toward the road. The other two followed, not looking back. When they were gone, the yard felt smaller. Sarah let out a breath she'd been holding. "You shouldn't have angered them," she said. "They came here to be angered," I told her. "Would have been rude not to oblige." She shook her head, but a hint of a smile ghosted her lips. "You think everything's a fight?" "It is," I said. "Some just last longer than others." That night, after the boys were asleep, we sat by the fire in silence. The flames threw light across her face, catching the lines the years had left. She spoke without looking at me. "They'll never let me stay. Not here, not anywhere." "They can't make you leave," I said. "They can take my children." She whispered, "They've done it before to others. Said it was for their protection." I didn't answer. I'd seen that happen too. Towns that call themselves righteous can justify anything when they dress it in scripture. She turned toward me then, eyes wet but fierce. "Why are you helping us, Mr. Tucker?" I took a long breath. The truth was heavier than I meant to carry. "Because I know what it's like to lose a family to a storm. Because sometimes a man gets a chance to do one thing right before he dies." She stared at me a moment, and in the quiet I could hear the fire settle, the boards creak, the breath of 3 sleeping boys in the next room. She reached across the table, her fingers brushing mine, light as wind. "Then maybe we both get to live a little longer," she said. Outside, the snow started again, soft and endless, covering everything that ever mattered, making it look almost clean. The snow didn't stop for 3 days. The sky hung low and heavy, the kind of gray that makes a man think the world forgot to breathe. Inside the cabin, time lost its shape. Morning and night looked the same, and the only clock we had was the fire, bright, then dim, then bright again. The boys played with their carved horses on the floor, while Sarah sat sewing by the hearth. I worked at the table mending a bridle strap that wasn't really broken. Some men drink to quiet their thoughts. I used leather and silence. On the 3rd evening, the storm finally eased, leaving the air sharp enough to crack. I stepped outside to check the roof. The snow came up to my knees. The sky had cleared, and the moon sat big and round, washing the valley in silver. From the ridge, I could see smoke from a dozen chimneys in town. Farther off, the frozen river glinted like a blade. It looked peaceful, but peace is just what trouble looks like before it speaks. When I came back in, Sarah was standing at the window, watching the light. "It's beautiful," she said. "It's a trick," I told her. "Snow covers everything. Makes you think of the world's clean." She smiled without humor. "Then maybe we need a few more tricks." The next morning, I hitched the horse and loaded the wagon. The supplies we bought wouldn't last the rest of winter, not with 4 mouths and a town watching for us to fail. Sarah wanted to come, but I told her to stay. "If Calhoun or any of his boys show up, bolt the door. Don't open it for anyone but me." She didn't like it, but she nodded. "Be careful," she said. "Men like that don't forgive." I ain't asking them to. I rode down to town with the wind at my back. The trail was rutted, frozen solid. By the time I reached the mercantile, my fingers were numb through the gloves. Hartley looked up when I came in. "You've got company," he said, nodding toward the far corner. Reverend Mills and Calhoun were standing by the stove, talking low. They turned when they saw me. The Reverend's face held the look of a man about to pray over a grave. Calhoun's grin said he already dug it. "Tucker," the Reverend began, "we've been meaning to talk." "Seems you're doing fine without me," I said. Calhoun chuckled. "Always a wit. We're holding a meeting tonight. Town council. Some concerns have been raised. About the widow, about the children." I felt my jaw tighten. "What kind of concerns?" The kind that call for clarity, the Reverend said. People are uneasy. They fear impropriety. I took a step closer, my boots grinding against the floorboards. If a woman and her children freezing to death is proper, then I'll take uneasy. The Reverend sighed, his breath fogging in the cold air. No one questions your kindness, Cole, but the law is the law. If she has no claim, the county may see fit to relocate her. The children could be placed with families. I looked from one to the other. Calhoun's eyes gleamed. He was enjoying this too much. You mean families like yours? I asked. Calhoun's smile didn't waver. Families of standing, folks who can offer stability. I leaned in until I could smell his cologne. She's stable enough, where she is. The Reverend stepped between us. No one wants a quarrel. We'll settle this with civility. Civility's just a word for keeping quiet, I said. You can write your letters and hold your meetings, but if anyone comes up that ridge looking to take those kids, they'd best bring a preacher for themselves. I left before they could answer. The door slammed behind me, and the cold air felt good on my face. On the ride home, I thought about the word relocate. It sounded tidy, polite, like you could move people the way you move cattle. But I'd seen what it meant. I'd seen the look in a mother's eyes when someone said, "The law has spoken." It's a look that never leaves you. By the time I reached the cabin, dusk was creeping through the trees. The boys were splitting kindling outside, their breath coming in white clouds. Sarah met me at the door. "You're late," she said, trying to sound casual, but her eyes searched my face. "Something happened." "They're calling a meeting," I said. "They want to take you and the boys." She went still. "On what grounds?" "Because they can," I said. She sank into the chair by the table, her hands trembling. "We've done nothing wrong." "That don't matter to men like Calhoun," I told her. "Right and wrong are just tools they sharpen to fit their purpose." The room went quiet, except for the fire. The boys sensed something and went still. I crouched beside her. "I'll handle it," I said. "How?" she asked. "By showing them what kind of man I am." She looked at me then, really looked. "And what kind is that, Mr. Tucker?" "The kind they can't push." That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the snow drift under the moon. Every few minutes I checked the path, half expecting to see lanterns coming through the dark. The memory of Calhoun's grin followed me like a shadow. I poured a measure of whiskey, let it sit untouched, and finally stepped outside. The cold hit like a slap. The stars burned low and steady. I walked to the barn, opened the door, and breathed in the smell of hay and old wood. My horse snorted softly, his breath a pale cloud. I rested my forehead against his neck and let the silence do the talking. Somewhere beyond the trees, a coyote called, long and lonesome. It sounded like the world remembering my name. The next day, the sky turned clear but cruel. The council met in the church hall, and half the town showed up to watch. I stood at the back, arms crossed, while the Reverend read from a piece of paper. He spoke about decency, about community, about the example we set for our children. I heard my name, Sarah's name, and the words, moral welfare. When he was done, Calhoun stood. "This isn't about charity," he said. "It's about order. The widow's presence in a single man's home, well, it invites talk, and talk leads to division. If Mr. Tucker wishes to continue his good works, there are proper ways." "Meaning?" someone asked. "Meaning," Calhoun said, smiling thin, "they can marry, or she can move on. Simple as that." The room murmured. Eyes turned toward me. I felt the weight of every gaze, every whisper. The Reverend raised a hand. "We ask for your cooperation, Mr. Tucker. We trust you'll do what's best for the town." I stepped forward, slow, deliberate. "The town," I said, "don't live up on that ridge. Those kids do, that woman does. You can call it improper all you want, but out there proper don't keep the fire burning." The Reverend opened his mouth to answer, but I was already walking out. The crowd parted like they expected me to draw iron. I didn't. Some fights, you don't win by force. You just refuse to lose. Back at the cabin, Sarah was waiting by the door. I told her what they said. She didn't cry. She just nodded, jaw tight. "Then we leave," she said. "No," I told her. We stay. They can't take what we won't give." She looked at me for a long time. "They'll make you their enemy." I shrugged. "No, I've been worse things." For the first time, she smiled. A real one. Small, tired, but alive. "Then I guess I'll be worse things too." The fire burned low, throwing long shadows against the walls. I poured her a cup of coffee, black and bitter. We drank in silence. The world outside was frozen, but inside the cabin the air felt different. Not warm exactly, just shared. It was the first time in years I didn't feel like I was waiting for something to end. The next week passed quiet, but quiet has a way of hiding things. It was the kind of stillness that comes before the earth splits. I spent my days chopping wood, fixing fences that didn't need fixing, riding the boundary line just to make sure it still belonged to me. The boys followed, helping when I let them, asking questions I didn't have the heart to answer. Sarah stayed close to the cabin. She'd hang the wash on the line, her eyes always drifting toward the trail, like she expected trouble to come walking up any moment. She wasn't wrong. On the 5th morning, I rode into town for feed and mail. The general store was half empty. Folks had stopped coming by when they decided my presence carried bad luck. Hartley kept his mouth shut, but I saw the truth in his eyes. I bought what I needed and turned to leave. That's when I saw the poster nailed beside the door. Council meeting, discussion of homestead rights and custody concerns. No names, but it didn't need any. Every word on that paper was written with us in mind. I took the paper down and folded it. "You ought to be careful printing lies," I told Hartley. He swallowed hard. "Ain't lies, Cole, just talk. Talk's how men start fires they don't mean to finish." He didn't look up again. I left town with the wind pushing hard behind me, the paper burning a hole in my pocket. By the time I reached the ridge, the sky had turned the color of old steel. Sarah was chopping wood beside the cabin, her hair loose, cheeks flushed from the cold. She stopped when she saw me. "What is it?" she asked. "They're meeting again," I said. "This time they mean business." Her face tightened. "You think they'll come?" "They will," I said. "When they do, I'll be ready." That night, after the boys were asleep, we sat at the table, the oil lamp throwing a small circle of light. The world outside was dark, the kind of dark that swallows even sound. Sarah held the folded notice, smoothing it out with careful hands. "They want to take my boys," she said softly. "They want to decide where we belong." "They can't decide that," I said. "They already have, haven't they? All they need is an excuse." Her voice broke on the last word. I reached across the table, touched her hand. "I won't let 'em," I said, mine and not them, not anyone. She looked up, eyes bright with fear and something else. Hope, maybe, or defiance. Why, she whispered, why risk yourself for us? Because I remember what it felt like, I said. Standing over graves, knowing you did everything right, and it still wasn't enough. Because maybe helping you is the one thing I can still get right. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of breath, of heartbeat, of all the things neither of us knew how to say. She squeezed my hand once, then pulled away, blinking fast. You should get some rest, she said. I didn't. I sat there long after she went behind the curtain, listening to the creak of the walls, the wind whispering around the eaves, and somewhere in the night, the dog growled low. I went to the window, hand on the rifle, and saw movement down the trail. 3 lanterns bobbing like fireflies in the dark. My stomach turned to stone. I grabbed my coat and stepped outside. The snow crunched underfoot, the cold biting through the leather. The lanterns came closer till faces took shape beneath their glow. Calhoun and 2 deputies from town, rifles slung across their shoulders. Evening, Tucker, Calhoun said. His voice was smooth as polished brass. Fine night for a visit. You should have written first, I said. I'd have left the door open. He laughed. I figured you'd be up. Thought we'd save you the trouble of riding down tomorrow. What do you want? He dismounted, boots sinking into the snow. We've a warrant. The council's decided the widow and her children ought to be placed under church care until her situation can be reviewed. I felt the blood rise in my ears. You come to take them? Just following the law, he said, handing me a folded paper. I tore it in half before he could blink. The law don't live up here. The deputy shifted uneasily. One of them muttered, We don't want no fight. Then turn around, I said. Go home. Calhoun smiled, slow and deliberate. You're making a mistake, Tucker. You think you're saving her, but all you're doing is digging yourself a grave beside your last one. That did it. I stepped forward, close enough that our breath met in the air. You say one more word about my family, I said, and I'll give you reason to pray. He held my gaze a long time, then nodded to the deputies. We'll be back, with more paper, more men. You can't shoot your way out of this. They turned and rode off, their lanterns shrinking to pinpricks against the dark. I stood there until they were gone, the wind cutting through my coat, my hands shaking not from cold, but rage. When I went back inside, Sarah was standing by the fire, the boys huddled behind her. What did they want? She asked. Nothing they'll get, I said. She looked at the torn paper in my hand. It's begun then. It's been begun, I said. They just finally admitted it. The next morning, I packed what ammunition I had, checked the locks, and made sure the horses were ready. Sarah tried to help, but I told her to rest. The boys watched from the doorway, silent and solemn. When I finished, I looked at her and said, If they come again, you take the boys through the creek bed, follow it east until you see the Black Rock. Wait for me there. She shook her head. No, we stay together. Sarah. I said no, she snapped. If they take me, fine, but they won't take my sons without a fight. The way she said it, calm, steady, made me believe her. That night, we slept in shifts, one watching, while the other rested. Every sound outside, the crack of ice, the groan of the wind felt like footsteps. 3 days passed. No one came. Then on the 4th night, I woke to the sound of boots in the yard, The dog barked once before a shot cut him silent. I was on my feet before the echo died, rifle in hand. Sarah was already up, the boys clutching her skirt. "Stay here," I said. I eased the door open just enough to see shadows moving across the snow. 4 men this time, not 3. They fanned out toward the barn, the porch, the window. One called out, "Tucker, by order of the council, open up." I answered with a warning shot that tore through the dark and sent them diving for cover. "That's my answer," I shouted. "You come closer. I'll make it final." A gun cracked back, splintering the doorframe. The boys screamed. Sarah pulled them behind the table. I fired again, aiming high. One of the lanterns shattered, spilling light and oil across the snow. The fire flared, brief and violent, before dying in the cold. When the smoke cleared, I heard hooves retreating, fast and frightened. I stayed at the door, rifle ready, until the last echo faded. When I turned back, Sarah was kneeling with the boys, whispering prayers I couldn't hear. Her hand shook, but her voice didn't. I set the rifle down and sat beside her. "They won't be back tonight," I said. "But they will come back," she whispered. I nodded. "Then we'll be ready." She looked at me then, eyes glistening in the firelight. "You can still leave, Cole, before it gets worse." "I'm already where I belong," I said. She reached out, her fingers brushing the side of my face. "Then so am I." Outside, the wind rose again, sweeping across the ridge, carrying the ashes of the broken lantern into the dark. Inside, the fire burned low, steady and stubborn, the way hope does when the world is against it. The morning after the gunfire, the valley held its breath. The snow lay smooth again, hiding the tracks, pretending nothing had happened. I didn't pretend. I walked the yard at first light, counting the footprints under the powder, seeing where they'd stood and where they'd run. Men leave truth in their boots. They'd come close, closer than I liked. One bullet had carved a line through the porch post, clean and straight, an inch from the height of my head. I ran my hand along it, cold to the touch. I left it there as a reminder. Sarah stepped out behind me, her shawl pulled tight. "You didn't sleep," she said. "I will when this is over." She followed my gaze to the barn. The door hung crooked where the latch had splintered. The dog's body lay half buried near the fence. She moved to cover her mouth, but I stopped her. "I'll take care of him," I said. "Go back inside. Keep the boys busy." She didn't argue, and that told me how tired she was. I dug a hole by the cottonwood, deep enough to keep the ground's promise. The dog had been with me since before the graves on the hill. I buried him without words, just a nod, and set a flat stone over the spot. When I stood, I saw smoke rising from the chimney and felt the weight of a thing I hadn't named yet, something between anger and duty. Maybe they were the same. Inside, the boys were cleaning the table, Sarah stirring a pot of thin stew. The youngest, Tommy, held the wooden horse I'd carved him. Its legs were chipped now, its mane uneven, but he ran his fingers over it like it was gold. He said you made it for him," Sarah said quietly. "He asked for something that could run," I answered. "Didn't have the heart to tell him wood don't move unless you push it." She gave a tired smile. "Maybe that's what faith is." I sat, poured coffee from the kettle, and let the warmth work its way into my hands. "I'm going down to see Moses," I said. "Need supplies, nails, maybe a word of sense." Sarah stopped stirring. "Will he help?" "If anyone will." Old Moses ran the forge by the river road. Black man, broad as two of me, eyes so calm they made fire look polite. He'd been here longer than any of the rest, before Willow Creek had a name worth writing down. Some said he was born a slave. Some said he walked free out of Tennessee with nothing but his hammer. Nobody asked him to prove it. You didn't ask things of Moses unless you meant to hear the truth. I saddled the horse and rode out, following the creek east until the smell of coal smoke found me. The forge stood against the hill, half wood, half stone. Sparks leapt from the open door, scattering into the air like wild bees. Moses looked up when I dismounted. "Morning, Cole," he said. "Heard a commotion last night. Sounded like trouble had your address." "Trouble always finds me," I said. He grinned. "Maybe stop leaving the door cracked." I told him what happened. Calhoun, the council, the shots. He listened without stopping his work, hammer rising and falling in rhythm, each strike sounding like a heartbeat under the earth. When I finished, he set the iron aside and wiped his hands on a rag. "They won't stop," he said. "Oh, men like Calhoun don't back down when they can smell a fight. They think the world's their ledger. Everything either owes them or belongs to them." "I figured that," I said. "I just need time." "For what?" "To make it right." He studied me, eyes narrow but not unkind. "You think right comes with a nail and a plank? You can't build peace with your fist, Cole, but you can build something they can't take apart easy." He reached behind the bench, pulled out a folded paper. It was old, creased, the ink fading. 40 acres on the East Ridge," he said. "Belonged to my brother before he moved west. I never filed it proper. It's still open. You stake it, it's yours. Or hers." I stared at him. "Why give it to me?" "'Cause you ain't the first fool to stand between the world and a woman with nowhere to go. But you might be the first with the sense to make it legal. You sign that land over to her name, Calhoun can yell until his teeth fall out. He can't touch what's written in law." I took the paper, the weight of it strange in my hands. "You sure about this, Moses? Man like me's learned that ownership ain't always about skin or name. Sometimes it's about who's got the courage to hold ground." I folded the deed and slipped it inside my coat. "Thank you," I said. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "Paper's only worth what you're willing to stand for. You take it to the notary before sundown, get it sealed. Then you give it to her in front of folks, make them see it." I nodded, mounted up, and turned toward town. The ride felt longer than it should have. Every hoofbeat carried a memory. My wife's laughter, the sound of my boy's hammer hitting wood, the silence that came after. When I reached Willow Creek, the sun was dropping behind the ridge, spilling gold across the church steeple. I went straight to the courthouse. The clerk, a young man with soft hands and eyes that didn't like to meet yours, looked up from his desk. "Need this recorded," I said, sliding the deed forward. He adjusted his spectacles. "Owner name?" "Sarah Callahan." He glanced at me. "You buying it for her?" "Giving it." He hesitated, but money speaks the same language everywhere. I paid the fee and watched him stamp the paper, the sound sharp as a gunshot. When he handed it back, the ink was still wet. It looked like hope made real. I rode home under a rising moon, the deed tucked safe inside my coat. The cabin lights glowed ahead, warm against the snow. Sarah met me at the door, worry etched deep in her face. "You were gone all day," she said. "I had business." I told her. "What kind of business?" "The kind that ends before it starts." I handed her the folded deed. She frowned, opened it, and read. Her lips parted. "What is this?" "Land," I said. "On yours. 40 acres East Ridge, water rights, all legal." She shook her head. "I can't take this." "You already did," I said. "It's in your name." Tears filled her eyes, catching the firelight. "Why, Cole?" "Because paper's louder than talk. Next time they come, you show them this. Tell them the law's on your side." She stared at me, the paper trembling in her hands. "I don't know how to thank you." "Don't," I said. "Just stay." She stepped closer, so close I could see the tiny flecks of gold in her gray eyes. "You've given me more than land," she said, "and you've given me a place." I didn't answer. Words felt too small for what hung between us. The fire cracked. The boys stirred in their sleep, and for the first time since the storm, the world felt quiet in a good way. The next morning, I shaved, put on my cleanest shirt, and hitched the wagon. Sarah and the boys climbed in without asking where we were going. The road to town was frozen solid, sunlight glinting off every drift. People turned to look as we passed. The widow, her children, and the man they decided was trouble. We stopped in front of the church. The bell was ringing for Sunday, but this time it was going to toll for something else. I helped Sarah down, the deed clutched in her hand. Reverend Mills was standing on the steps, Bible under his arm, eyes wary. Calhoun lingered nearby, his smile too quick to be honest. I took a breath, the kind that tastes of iron and decision, and nodded to Sarah. "Time to tell them who owns what," I said. And then I started walking toward the church, every step louder than the bell itself. The church doors swung wide as I stepped inside. The place was already full. Faces turned, whispers rising like wind through dry grass. I'd stood in rooms like that before, rooms that pretended to be holy while men plotted what they'd already decided. The Reverend froze mid-sermon, his Bible open in his hands, words dying on his lips. Sarah followed behind me, the boys clinging to her skirts, the folded deed pressed against her chest like scripture. I stopped halfway down the aisle and took off my hat. "Reverend," I said, my voice carrying clear and slow, "you've had plenty to say about sin and charity. I reckon today you'll hear about justice." The room shifted. Hartley from the store coughed. Someone's chair creaked. Calhoun sat in the front pew, hands folded, smile fixed in place like a man certain the show belonged to him. "Mr. Tucker," the Reverend began, careful, as if I were a rifle pointed his way. "This isn't the time." "It's exactly the time," I said. "You called a meeting about a woman's right to exist under her own roof. You called it improper, unfit, unchristian. I've come to set the record straight." I turned, motioned for Sarah. She stepped forward, chin high, though her hands trembled. I took the folded paper from her and held it up for all to see. "This," I said, "is a deed. 40 acres East Ridge, water rights included, signed, sealed, and recorded by your own courthouse clerk. The name on it ain't mine. It's hers, Sarah Callahan. So if any man here believes she don't belong, he can take it up with the law of this land and with me." A murmur rippled through the pews. The Reverend blinked, his mouth working, but no words coming. Calhoun stood, slow and smooth. "Pretty paper, Tucker," he said, "but one man's trick doesn't change what's proper. You can't erase reputation with ink." I met his eyes. Reputation's what folks whisper when they don't have proof. This here's proof. I unfolded the deed, slapped it flat against the pulpit, and left my hand there. This church preaches about the Lord's house. Well, this woman's got one now, a real one, built with work, paid for honest, signed by law. That's more than most men here can claim. A low rumble of voices filled the room. The Reverend stepped forward, his face drawn tight. "Cole, please, this isn't the way to bring peace." "Peace," I said. "You think peace comes from silence? Peace is something you earn after you stop lying to yourself about what's right. That woman and her boys nearly froze to death while this town turned its back. I took them in because no one else would. You call that improper. I call it human." The Reverend's gaze softened, but his voice stayed firm. "You're angry." "You're damn right I'm angry," I said, and the word echoed through the rafters. "You stand here every Sunday telling folks about compassion, about the Good Samaritan, about lifting up the fallen. Then you send letters and laws to tear down the one good thing left standing." Calhoun's voice cut through the noise, sharp and steady. "This performance won't change a thing. You're not fooling anyone, Tucker. The town sees you for what you are, a man hiding sin behind a noble story." I turned toward him, slow enough for every eye to follow. "If I'm hiding sin, Calhoun, it's the kind that keeps children warm, the kind that doesn't care what a man like you thinks is proper." He took a step forward, lips curling. "You talk big for someone standing alone." I smiled, small and tired. "Ain't alone." Sarah's voice rose behind me, clear as the bell outside. "He's not." She moved up beside me. The boys pressed close. "You want to call me names? Fine. But my children have a roof now. They have land, and they have a man who treated us with kindness when this whole town turned cruel. If that's a sin, then I'll keep it." The crowd stilled. Calhoun's smirk faltered for the first time. The Reverend looked down at his Bible, fingers tightening on the cover. "Enough," he said softly. "This house is for prayer." "Then pray," I told him. "Pray that the next time a woman knocks at your door in the cold, you remember this day before you send her away." I took the deed, folded it once more, and handed it back to Sarah. The boys watched, eyes wide and shining. "Let's go," I said. We turned toward the doors. No one stopped us. No one spoke. The sound of our boots on the wooden floor filled the silence like a drumbeat. Outside, the light was blinding after the dim church. Snowflakes drifted slow from a sky the color of forgiveness. Sarah stood still on the steps, the boys clinging to her hands. The townfolk spilled out behind us, muttering, unsure which way the wind would blow next. Calhoun came last, jaw set, eyes dark. "This isn't finished, he said. "It is for me," I said. He moved closer, low enough only I could hear. "You think that paper protects her? You can't buy respect." "No," I said, "but you can earn it, and you can lose it." He stared a moment longer, then turned and walked away. The Reverend followed, slower, his hat in his hands. He stopped beside Sarah. "Mrs. Callahan," he said quietly, "I was wrong. The Lord's work isn't always clean. I see that now." She nodded once, and that was mercy enough. We left town as the sun dipped behind the hills, the wagon creaking over the frozen ruts. The boys laughed in the back, voices high and bright. Sarah sat beside me, her hands resting on the deed in her lap. I glanced at her, the wind tugging strands of her hair loose. "You handled yourself fine back there," I said. She smiled faintly. "I just told the truth." "That's the hardest thing to tell," I said. The road wound upward toward the ridge, the same ridge where the storm first found her. Only now the path looked different, still cold, still wild, but less empty. I felt something shift inside me, small and quiet, like ice cracking before a thaw. When we reached the cabin, the light from the windows spilled across the snow. Sarah climbed down, helped the boys inside. I unhitched the horse, patted his neck, and turned toward the valley. From up there I could see the church steeple, tiny and far, the bell glinting in the last of the sun. Maybe they'd keep talking, maybe they wouldn't. Either way, it didn't matter. Inside, the smell of stew filled the air. The boys argued over who chopped the most wood. Sarah laughed, a sound I hadn't heard from her before. Clear, honest, alive. She turned when I stepped in, her face warm from the firelight. "You hungry?" she asked. "Always," I said, and she smiled wider. We ate together, not saying much. After, when the boys had drifted to sleep by the hearth, I sat by the window, watching the night settle over the valley. Sarah came to stand beside me. "You think they'll come again?" she asked. "They might," I said, "but next time they'll think twice." She looked at me, eyes soft but steady. "And you? You'll stay?" I turned toward her, the words heavy but true. "I ain't leaving again." She didn't speak. She just reached for my hand, and for once, neither of us needed to fill the silence. The wind outside had calmed, the sky wide and still. Somewhere down in town, a bell rang once, faint, uncertain, then gone. For the first time in a long while, I let the quiet stay. Spring came late that year, sneaking in under the door like a thief afraid to wake the house. The snow melted slow, feeding the creek until it sang louder than the church bell down in Willow Creek. The boys ran wild in the thaw, splashing through puddles, chasing the first green shoots, pushing through the mud. Sarah laughed more these days. It came easy now, like she'd remembered how. The sound filled the cabin better than any hymn. I spent my mornings mending fences, my afternoons breaking soil on the east ridge where her deed said her land began. The ground was stubborn, but it yielded if you worked it honest. That's something this country teaches a man. Everything worth keeping fights you at first. I'd watch her from the field sometimes, hanging laundry in the wind, the boys darting around her like sparrows. The sight of them against that wide sky did something to me I hadn't expected. It steadied me, the way a hammer finds rhythm once it trusts your hand. But peace doesn't come free, not out here. Every man who's lived long on the frontier knows that. Trouble rides circles before it shows itself. One morning, I found tracks down by the creek. 2 horses, heavy riders. They'd stopped near the ford and turned back. Not hunters, scouts. I didn't say anything to Sarah, but I cleaned my rifle that night and made sure the barn doors stayed barred. A week later, the letter came. It was slipped under the door while we slept. No stamp, no seal, just one line written in a careful hand. "You've had your victory, Tucker. Enjoy it while it lasts." Sarah read it once, then folded it tight. "Calhoun?" she asked. "Who else?" She stared at the paper a long time. "What does he want now?" "Control," I said. "Same thing he's always wanted." We burned the letter, watched the smoke curl up the chimney and vanish. But after that, I saw her startle at every sound outside, every knock of wood in the wind. I told her not to worry. I told her a lot of things I wasn't sure I believed. It was near the end of April when the next storm came. Not snow this time, but wind and rain and something worse. I was coming back from the ridge, leading the horse through the mud, when I saw the glow. At first I thought it was lightning behind the hill. Then I smelled the smoke. "Sarah," I shouted, dropping the reins. Flames were climbing up the side of the barn, crackling against the wet night. The rain hissed where it touched, but the fire had too much head start. I kicked the door open, grabbed the buckets by the trough, and started throwing water as fast as my arms would go. Sarah was already there, the boys behind her, forming a line without me asking. She passed buckets from the barrel, her hair plastered to her face, eyes fierce as the fire itself. We fought it till dawn. When the last ember died, the barn was half gone. The roof caved in. The horses were safe, thank God, but everything else, tools, feed, hay, was ash. Sarah sank to her knees in the mud, shaking with exhaustion. I put a hand on her shoulder. "It's done," I said. Her voice was ragged. "How did it start?" I didn't answer. In the half-burned doorway, I saw the remains of a lantern, glass shattered, wick black. It wasn't ours. Someone had been here. The boys stood silent, their faces smudged with soot. Jacob looked at me, his jaw set the way mine used to be when I thought anger could fix things. "They did this, didn't they?" he said. I nodded once. Sarah rose slowly, wiping her face. "Then we rebuild." Her tone left no room for doubt. She turned to the boys. "Go fetch what's left of the tools. We'll need everything we can save." I watched her take charge, the same woman who'd arrived half frozen and afraid. There was no fear now, only resolve. I realized then she wasn't someone I'd rescued. She was someone who'd learned how to stand beside me. We worked all day, salvaging what we could. When the light faded, the barn was a skeleton of black beams against a red sky. My hands were raw, my arms numb. I sat on the porch, staring at the smoke rising from the ruin. Sarah came out, carrying a mug of coffee. "They'll keep coming," I said out. "Calhoun won't stop until he takes what he thinks he owns." She handed me the mug. "Then we make it so he can't touch it." "How?" "By showing him he can't break what's already been rebuilt." I looked at her over the rim of the cup. "You sound like Moses." She smiled faintly. "Maybe I listen better than you think." We sat there in the dark, the boys asleep inside, the air thick with the smell of wet ash. Somewhere down the valley, a coyote called. Sarah leaned her head against my shoulder, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you for not giving up on us." "I didn't do it for thanks," I said. "I know," she murmured. "That's why it matters." I didn't answer. I just kept my eyes on the ridge, waiting for the first sign of dawn. When morning came, the light hit the ruins in a way that made them look less like a grave and more like a beginning. The boys were already up, hammering at boards, arguing over how to rebuild the stall. Sarah stood watching them, her hands on her hips, a small smile playing on her lips. I walked to her side. "You think it'll hold?" I asked. She nodded. "We've held. The rest will follow." We rebuilt through the next week, side by side. Neighbors began to appear, quietly at first. Hartley brought nails. The Reverend sent a cart of lumber and didn't stay long enough for thanks. Even a few men who'd voted against us lent their hands, shamed into decency by what they'd seen burn. By the time the barn stood again, smaller but stronger, something in the town had shifted. Calhoun stayed unseen. Rumors said the railroad company had pulled his contracts. Maybe it was true. Maybe the Lord had a sense of humor after all. The night we finished, Moses rode up, his beard frosted with dust, a smile under it. "Told you," he said, "ain't nothing built honest that stays down long." I shook his hand. "You were right." He looked at Sarah, then at me. "You two found yourselves a home. Don't forget to live in it." When he left, the stars came out, sharp and endless. The boys lay in the hay, whispering stories to each other. Sarah leaned against the doorway, her hair lit by the lantern's glow. I stood beside her, the smell of new wood in the air. "Feels different," she said. "It is," I said. "This time it's ours." She looked at me, her eyes soft but steady. "Ours," she repeated. And for the first time since that night in the blizzard, I believed it. Summer found us before we knew we'd earned it. The grass on the ridge turned green as a promise, and the creek ran full, singing against the stones. The cabin no longer felt like a refuge. It felt like a life. Every morning, the smell of bread met the sun. The boys grew strong from work, barefoot and wild, their laughter mixing with the sound of hammers and birds. Sarah kept the garden neat, her hands brown from soil instead of cold. There were nights when I'd wake and for a breath forget that winter had ever happened. The world has a way of giving a man peace only after he's learned to live without it. One evening, while I was mending a harness by the porch, Sarah came out with a letter in her hand. It had the town seal on it, and her name printed clean across the front. She looked at it like a rattlesnake she wasn't sure was dead. "Came by the store," she said. "Hartley sent it up with one of his boys." I took it, turning it over. The wax was fresh. I could smell the same cologne that Calhoun wore. I broke the seal and read. The words were smooth, careful, lawyer's words. Calhoun had sold half his holdings to an Eastern company, including lands that bordered ours. He planned to build a freight line. He wanted access to the creek crossing, our creek crossing. The letter offered a price that sounded generous to anyone who'd never been poor. I handed it back to her. "He's not done," I said. Her mouth tightened. "We won't sell." "He's counting on that." We sat quiet a while, the sky burning orange over the valley. The boys were down by the barn, their voices drifting up in waves. "He'll come again," she said. "Then he'll come to the wrong door, I answered, and he did. It was near harvest, heat thick enough to hang on your skin when Calhoun rode up the trail. He wasn't alone. 2 men behind him, their coats too fine for ranch work, their faces hidden under dust. He dismounted slow, like a man showing he owned the ground. I was chopping wood when I heard the hooves. I didn't stop. "Afternoon, Tucker, my," he called. "Fine spread you've built here." I split another log before answering. "Not mine," I said. "Belongs to Mrs. Callahan." He smiled that old smile, thin as wire. "Of course. Still, you've been busy. I admire it." "What do you want, Calhoun?" He gestured toward the creek. "Progress. The railroad's coming through. It'll bring money, trade, a future. All I need is access along the east bank. Won't change much for you. Just a few feet of water." I set the axe down slow. "You mean our water?" He sighed like a man dealing with a child. "Don't be unreasonable. You'll be compensated. More money than this patch of dirt will ever give you." Sarah stepped out then, wiping her hands on her apron. "We're not selling," she said. Calhoun turned, his eyes running over her face. the way men do when they forget there's a bullet behind the look. Ma'am, he said, it'd be a shame to stand in the way of progress. It'd be a sin to sell what feeds our children, she said. He chuckled. Progress doesn't ask permission. I stepped closer. It'll have to. He studied me a long time. You can't keep fighting the tide, Tucker. It's bigger than you, bigger than her. The town's on my side. I shook my head. The town's on its own side, always has been. The air between us thickened. The two men shifted, hands near their belts. Calhoun's eyes flicked to them, then back to me. Think about it, he said finally. The offer stands for a week. He climbed back on his horse, his voice soft but sharp. After that, the railroad won't ask. It'll take. I watched them ride off until the dust swallowed them. Sarah exhaled, her shoulders sinking. He means it, she said. He always does. That night, I went to the barn, opened the chest, where I kept the old rifle wrapped in oiled cloth. I cleaned it slow, the smell of gun oil and cedar filling the air. Sarah found me there, leaning in the doorway. You think it'll come to that? She asked. I think he's a man who mistakes silence for surrender, I said. She stepped closer, her eyes searching mine. If it does, I'll stand with you. I met her gaze. I know you will. That's what scares me. She reached out, touched my arm. Then don't be scared. We've already lived through worse. Her hand stayed there a moment longer than a habit would allow. I caught it, turned it over, and pressed my thumb against the ring that had long since dulled to gray. You ever think about taking it off? I asked. She looked down at it. I did once, she said, the day I buried him. But I couldn't. It wasn't just his. It was proof I'd loved someone once and survived losing him. I nodded. Maybe it's time it meant something new. She lifted her eyes, steady and warm. Maybe it already does. The days that followed moved slow but heavy. Word spread through the valley that the railroad deal had soured. Men came asking questions, their tone polite, but their hands restless. I told them the same thing every time. The land wasn't mine to sell. Sarah's name carried more weight than they liked, and that burned them worse than any bullet could. Moses came up one afternoon, his wagon full of tools and a knowing smile. Heard Calhoun's got himself backed into a corner, he said. Feels like he's still swinging, I said. Moses laughed. Let him. Swinging men always hang themselves if you give them enough rope. He looked at Sarah then. You hold your ground, miss. The law's on your side now, and the Lord favors the stubborn. She smiled. Then we're doubly blessed. He tipped his hat and rolled off, the sound of his wheels fading down the trail. That night, lightning flashed over the hills, but no rain came. The wind carried the smell of iron, of something waiting to break. I stood on the porch, watching the storm roll in without thunder. Sarah joined me, her shawl tight around her shoulders. You ever wonder, she said, if peace is just the quiet between storms? Always, I said, but I'll take it while it lasts. She leaned against me, her voice soft. You think we deserve it? I looked out over the land, our land, the fields, the barn rebuilt, the light in the window. Deserve's got nothing to do with it, I said. We just keep it as long as it lets us. The wind shifted then, carrying a smell I'd learned not to ignore. Smoke, faint but certain. I turned my head toward the valley. Down past the creek, a dull red flickered against the horizon. Not a house, not lightning, torches. "They're coming," I said. Sarah's fingers tightened around my arm. "Calhoun, or what's left of him." I reached for the rifle by the door. "Wake the boys," I said. "We got one more storm to ride out." And as the first sparks rose into the dark, the world held its breath once again. They came just past midnight, the way cowards always do, half drunk on power, full drunk on fear. I saw their torches first, wavering through the trees like fireflies gone mad. The wind carried their voices up the ridge, rough and mean, the kind that sound braver in numbers. Sarah had already woken the boys. I heard her whispering to them behind the curtain, calm but quick, her tone steady as a drum beat. The youngest started to cry. She hushed him with a promise she didn't have time to shape. I stepped out onto the porch, rifle across my chest. The air smelled of smoke and rain that hadn't fallen yet. The torches drew closer, a dozen at least. At their head rode Calhoun, his hat low, his coat shining dark with oil. Even from a distance I could see the grin, thin, fixed, dead behind the eyes. "Evening, Tucker," he called. "Heard you built yourself a kingdom up here." I didn't answer. My silence was enough. He raised a hand, and the riders fanned out across the yard. The firelight caught their faces. Men from town. Men I'd known once. They didn't meet my eyes. The first line of snow melt water trickled under their horses' hooves, a sound soft and steady as a heartbeat. Calhoun's smile tightened. "You turned down progress, Cole. Bad business. The railroad won't wait on sentiment. Now I ain't unreasonable. Step aside, sign over the rights to the creek, and no harm done. Otherwise, well, accidents happen in the hills." I shifted my stance, the rifle steady. "You call burning barns accidents?" He laughed. "Well, you can't prove that." "I don't need to." He sighed, mock regretful. "Then it seems you're still the same fool you've always been. A man too proud to see when he's beaten." I raised the rifle and fired once into the ground between his horse's front hooves. The sound cracked across the ridge, rolling down into the valley like thunder. "You take one more step," I said, "and the next one finds its mark." For a second nobody moved. Then a voice from behind him shouted, "He's bluffing." The kind of man who believes courage and stupidity are the same thing. He spurred forward. I didn't give him the chance to learn. The second shot took the lantern from his hand, shattered glass and flames spilling into the mud. The horse reared, throwing him hard. He hit the ground with a noise that silenced the others better than any sermon. Calhoun's grin cracked. "That's enough," he barked. "No one shoots back unless I say." But his men were already shifting in their saddles, doubt seeping through the bravado. Men who fight for pay always lose to those fighting for home. Behind me, the door opened. Sarah stepped out, a shotgun in her hands. The boys were at the window, my eyes wide but dry. "You'll not touch this land," she said, her voice low and sure. "You'll not touch what's ours." Calhoun turned to her, surprise flashing across his face before pride swallowed it. "Mrs. Callahan," he said, almost gentle, "you don't belong in the middle of this." "I've been in the middle of it since the day your town left us to die in the snow," she said. The way she stood, straight, unflinching, made even the wind hesitate. Calhoun's horse sidestepped, sensing what its rider couldn't. He looked around, saw his men faltering, saw me and Sarah both armed, and the spell broke. His voice dropped low. "You can't hold this forever, Tucker. You can't fight everyone." I took a step forward. "I don't have to fight everyone, just you." He laughed once, sharp, but there was no music in it. "You think killing me fixes anything?" I shook my head and no, but it ends something that should have ended long ago. He reached for his pistol, but the moment stretched too long. The hammer clicked before he cleared the holster. My rifle spoke first. The shot hit the dirt beside his boot, close enough to make him freeze. He looked down, then back at me, all the swagger gone. "You'll hang for this," he said. "Maybe," I said, "but not tonight." He hesitated, then turned his horse. "Let's go," he told the others. "We'll let the law sort this out." But the way his hand trembled told me the law had just left him. The riders followed, torches snuffed, their shapes swallowed by the trees. When the sound of hooves faded, I lowered the rifle. Sarah exhaled, the sound breaking the stillness. I turned to her. "You all right?" She nodded, though her hand shook. "It's over? For now." I looked toward the trail. He won't be back himself, but men like him never ride alone. She stepped closer, close enough that the firelight caught the tears streaking through the soot on her face. "Then we'll be ready again," she said. We buried the empty cartridges in the wet soil. The night stretched quiet, the stars flickering through the smoke. The boys finally slept, their small bodies huddled under one blanket, save for the first time since the world had turned on them. Morning came soft, gray and calm. The ridge smelled of rain and gunpowder. I walked to the creek, washed my hands in the cold water, and watched the ripples fade. When I came back, Sarah was on the porch, her hair loose in the wind. She looked tired but lighter, like someone who'd finally stopped running. "I didn't thank you," she said. "You don't have to." "I do," she said, stepping closer. "You gave us a home, not just walls and land, a place to belong." I looked at her, sunlight catching the silver ring still on her finger. "It's your name on the deed," I said. "You built it as much as I did." She smiled faintly. "Maybe now it's both of ours." The words hung there, simple, perfect. She took off the ring, turned it once between her fingers, then placed it on the porch rail. "I don't need to hold on to ghosts anymore," she said. I nodded, my throat too tight to answer. The wind lifted, carrying the smell of wildflowers up from the valley. The last of the snowmelt shimmered in the creek, bright as polished steel. That evening, we stood on the hill behind the cabin. From there you could see everything, the barn rebuilt, the fields stretching green, the smoke from the chimney curling straight into the open sky. The boys ran ahead, their laughter chasing the sunset. Sarah took my hand. It felt natural, like something that had been waiting its turn. "Home," she said softly. "Home," I echoed. Down below, the church bell rang once, slow and clear. I couldn't tell if it was for evening prayer or something else entirely. Maybe both, maybe neither. All I knew was that the sound carried up the ridge and settled in my chest, warm as a fire that finally belonged to me. I'd spent years building fences to keep the world out. Turns out, what I needed was a door to let it back in. So if anyone ever asks what became of Cole Tucker, the man who once lived alone on the edge of Willow Creek, tell him this: I stayed, and when the wind rises through the grass on that ridge, carrying the laughter of 3 boys and the soft hum of their mother's voice, you'll know the story's true, because I'm still here, and she's home now.